Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com and devnursery.com, where you can find all my playlists of different topics all organized, and join the Slack community of developers over there at devnursery.com. Now, what I want you guys to learn today is about three things. We're going to do a brief overview of Flexbox, Grid, and also mobile responsive design, being able to do media queries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up, I'm using Visual Studio Code to do my HTML, CSS. I'm going to spin up a new folder for a new project. So we'll just call this Flex Grid. I'm going to create a new HTML file, index.html. Okay. And I'm going to create a new file, which is going to be called style.css. Okay, cool. So I got these two files. That's what I need. My HTML file. I can quickly spin up some HTML boilerplate pretty quick by just hitting HTML, then choosing HTML5, which gives me all my UTF-8, so I can use emojis. Gives me this tag, which is going to allow media queries to work. Okay, so what the individual details don't matter so much more than you do need this tag for media queries to work. And we're good. Now we need to add the tag for our CSS. So I can just type in the word link, and I get these options, choose the CSS one, and it automatically connects to a style.css. That's why I name it that way, so that way this kind of locks in with the default. Okay, now I'm connected to my CSS style sheet. Okay, so we've done that. Okay, so in that, let me just put a title here. Alex's Flex and Grid Practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 4 squares of 4 different colors that we'll play with. Okay, in different ways. Okay, so I'm going to set up a main tag that represents our main content. Okay, again, main is a semantic tag, so it's literally just a div, just with a name different than div. Same thing goes for main, article, aside, header, footer. They're just divs, just with names that seem familiar. Okay, so there's a main tag. And cool. Now what I'm going to do in here is we're going to create 4 divs. And actually in VS Code, you can use emmet. Emmet's a way to abbreviate HTML tags in a way that makes it where it's really quick to set up. So I can just type in div for a div tag, and then I'm going to give this class the class of red, because it's going to be a red square. Okay, and actually I'm going to give it 2 classes. I'm going to make it a square, and then red's going to be the color. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so red dot square. Okay, and so when I do that, the dot red is a class, the dot square is a class. So when I do this, because literally what you're doing is you're just drawing the CSS selector, and then emmet will turn it into an HTML tag. So now when I do this, boop, now I got a div with a class of red and square, because you can have more than one class, long as they're separated by a space. So then I'm going to do a div that's called green and square class. Then I'm going to have a div that is a blue and square class. And then I'm going to have a div that is orange and square class. Okay, so there we go. I have this main block that has 4 divs inside of it with these classes. Yay! And again, I am assuming that you know the basics of CSS and HTML if you're watching this video. If you don't know what HTML and CSS is, this is not the video for you. Go over to devnursery.com, go find the HTML CSS playlist, watch that, and you'll get to this point. Okay, cool. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go over to my style.css. Okay, and I'm going to create styles. So right now, I'm going to do an empty style for my main tag, because we're not going to do anything there yet. Okay, actually I'm just going to put display block. That's the default, so it's already doing that. It's by default a block element, but just to kind of show you what I'm going to do in a second. So there's main display block, and then there's all my divs. I'm just going to worry about the classes. So anything with the dot square is just going to have a height of 200, we'll say 150 pixels, and a width of 150 pixels. Okay. So that just basically makes them a square, but doesn't actually determine what their size is. And on that note, I need to put in like just a single letter, so that way the div shows up. If there's no content in it, the element just won't show up. But the default color, well, I will just make the color the same as the color of the text, the same as the color of the element. So we're going to do dot blue. So we're going to say background color is blue, and I want to make the text color blue so you don't see the text. So it just looks like a solid blue block. And then I'll do the same thing for all the other colors. So I'll just copy this 4 times. So I think one is orange. This is orange. Orange. Then I think we had a red one. A red one. And then we had a green one. Cool. So now when I open up this page, so if you haven't already, you can install an extension on VS Code called Live Server. Okay, I already have it installed, but you can install this, and once you do this, you can right click on an HTML file and then open up with Live Server, and it just opens up a server in that folder. And now I can just open up the file, and there we go. So there's my 4 squares: red, green, black, red, green, blue, and yellow. And right now they're all stacked on top of each other because that's the default behavior of a block element. Okay, so right now all of these are inside this main div, okay, this main element. And see, they just get each individual square, which again, technically, the element, the block is the whole thing right to left, but they get stacked right on top of each other. Okay, cool. So first let's show you how Flexbox works. So what matters is this main element. So this element that they're all wrapped in, I can change the way that behaves, and that changes what happens inside. How we decide where these blocks inside go. Okay, so now if I were to, so just the simplest thing change, or I just change this from block to flex. Okay, and actually let me just do one other thing first. What if I made those, well, yeah, let's just make it flex. Okay, and if I make it flex, see now all the divs inside line up horizontally by default. Okay, so that's what Flexbox does. Okay, so now I have this main element, still takes up that full width, but these blocks will then just suddenly collapse, initially all flush to the left, but now they're being horizontally laid out. Now I can change their layout in a couple different ways, and I can do that all from the main tag. There's a lot of different flex properties, so I recommend reading documentation to learn all the different properties for manipulating your Flexbox, but just to show you a few. Probably the one you'll use the most is justify content. So I could change this to center. Okay, so if I do that, save. So now the blocks are center. Okay, I could change it to, pretty sure I could change it to left. Okay, and that would, well, that was the default. And change it to right. Actually, I think it's flex end, so it's the end of the Flexbox. Yep, flex end, which then lines it up with the end of the Flexbox. And then flex start lines it up with the beginning of the Flexbox. Then there is justify, space between. And what that does is it's going to take the 2 outermost ones and put them to the edge, and then space everything else evenly in between. So this space, and this space are identical. Or you can do space around, which then spaces even takes into consideration. So technically, the two outer spaces are the same amount as these inner spaces. So you have sort of this even spacing. And that's one of the strongest things about Flexbox, the way it allows you to sort of create flexible rows. Okay? Now let's do this. So now if I were to go here and create a whole bunch more divs. So now there's 12 of these blocks. I go here now. Notice they go off the page. Okay, technically there should be 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, there it perfectly fits. Oh, actually, technically, well, let's see here. They're not quite perfectly squares anymore. So now it's actually trying to squeeze them in. So it'll keep them all in the same row. But watch, it's going to squeeze them in. So I'll add some more. And see, it squeezes them in. And it'll keep squeezing them in on that same row. What if I really wanted them to kind of wrap onto different rows? Then I can do this. I can do flex wrap and just change this to wrap. And now it'll wrap onto separate rows based on the way I space them out. Okay, so that's pretty cool. That's pretty useful. Okay, now I don't really like how they're all crunched up together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some margin to these squares. So we're going to say 20 pixel margin. Make sure they're all spaced a little bit better. Okay, so that's a little bit nicer. Okay. So we have all these squares in two nice little rows. So that's pretty cool. Okay. Now let's say that our main block actually had a fixed height. So let's give this main block a height of 600 pixels. Okay. So now this main goes from all the way down to here. Now what if I wanted to change the vertical alignment of these blocks? I can use align content. Align content will take those blocks and change them vertically. There's also align items. They pretty much do the same thing with slightly different properties. But here I can do like space between. So once again, what it does, it's going to line up these with the edges of the box. So you see this row's at the bottom, that one's towards the top. I can do space around, where it'll again evenly space them around. So now they're not quite with the edge of the main box. Instead, they're spaced evenly around. I can smush them all in the center. Okay, and see now they're all in the center of that big giant block. So that's the power of Flexbox. It allows you to take a lot of things and set them up in rows. And again, it doesn't have to be little blocks. It could just be sort of little menu items. The best thing to do is to take a look at a website. And let's say we go to a website I haven't been to in a long time, Mashable.com. Okay, let's take a look at their design. Okay, so see this toolbar, this is probably one single Flexbox. Okay, and then these are all each of these are basically elements in that Flexbox. Or actually, this is probably two divs. So there's a div here. That's one div inside of the bigger div. That's the whole row, and then this is another div, and they use a space between to push this div all the way to this edge, and to push this block to this edge, and then inside of it there's other individual blocks. Okay, this is probably another row. Okay, so this hero image is just another Flexbox row. This is another Flexbox row, where here's another one div inside the Flexbox. Here's another div inside the Flexbox, and then here's another div inside the Flexbox. You start really looking at the website, and you start seeing these rows. Okay, now here we're starting to see maybe what might be grid. But the point is, once you get your arms around Flexbox and grid, you can start taking a look at the website and start seeing blocks that you can assemble. And that's sort of the goal of these layout tools. So now that we've done Flexbox, let's talk about grid. Okay, so with grid, what you're doing is you're drawing lines on a. So I'm going to go back to just 4 divs. Okay, And what you have to do first, I'm going to get rid of all these Flexbox properties. Okay, I'll keep the height, although I'll probably make that 400 in a second. Okay, let's get rid of justify content. This is all Flexbox stuff. Cool. Okay, so let's make the main box a 400 pixel by with 400 pixel block. Okay, with a background color of gray, so that way we can see that where it exists. And the cool thing about gray is that it actually registers whether you type it that way or you type it that way. It'll recognize it. Just a fun fact. Okay. So there is our div with the 4 things in front of it. Right now, it doesn't really know what to do with these blocks. So it's just kind of lining them up vertically. Did I change it to grid? No, it's still flex. So it's still lining them up horizontally. Okay, but it's a gray square. I want to move this gray square to the center. So how do I move a block to the center? To move a block to the center, you just type in margin auto. Okay, and that's going to move it to the center. Nice. Now I would like to push it a little bit off the top. So I'm going to give the box some margin. So what I'm going to do is give it like 40 pixels auto. Because the first number is the vertical margin. This is the horizontal margin. So when I do that, see, now you got a little cushion there at the top. Let's just give it a little bit more. Let's give it 100. There we go. Cool. So what we're going to do is first, we're going to change our display. So we're going to change our block to no longer be a flex box that's trying to line up our divs horizontally. Instead, now it's going to be a grid. And right now, it shouldn't do much. See, it just breaks. It's back to stacking them horizontally because we have to define our grid. We have to show what our grid looks like. So there's a couple ways of doing it. The first way of doing it is you define, what you do is you do like grid, you do this property here. So first you change it to grid, so we have our display grid here. First we're going to do grid template columns. Now what I want is there to be just a 4x4 grid. So like 2 squares on the top, 2 squares on the bottom. So when you think about that, that's really 3 lines. Okay, there's a starting line, the middle dividing line, and then the third line. So what you do is you put a square bracket to represent the name of the line. So we're going to say start, or let's say the right. No, this is actually the left line. And that's going to represent 1 fractional unit. What 1 fractional unit does, it takes whatever the height or width of that element is, divide it by the total number of fractional units, and align it that way. So I'll explain that again in a second. So we're going to have our center line, another fractional unit, and then our right line. Okay, cool. So what that does, okay, I mean technically it just kind of assembled it perfectly already, but we'll come back to that. Basically, if I hover over it, you can see it's already kind of created that grid. I didn't define the rows yet specifically, but it kind of knows where I'm going. So it'll assume that. But essentially you can see, if I were just to kind of hold this somehow, let's see if I do this. See, like this line is technically the right line, this dotted line here. This is the center line, this is the right line here. So those are the lines I just defined. Nice. Okay. And now again, it kind of figured it out already, but I want to make sure it's explicit. So then I do grid template rows, and now I'm doing the same thing. So there's the top line, so we'll call this top. 1 fractional unit. The middle. And again, you can call it whatever you want. These are just names that I'm assigning to it. If I could call this like cheese, dog, cat, if I wanted to. Okay, it doesn't matter what you call inside the brackets. Okay, and then bottom. Cool. So now if I hover over it, okay, technically this is the top line, this is the center line, and this is the bottom line. Okay, that's the names I gave them. And see, basically what it did, it said, okay, you have 3 lines. Now, I did 2 fractional units. Because if you go here, I see I did 1 fractional unit, 2 fractional units. So what it says is going to take the height and then split it into 2 because that's a total number of fractional units, and then give this row one fractional unit, and then give this row one fractional unit. So by doing that in both the columns and the rows, I've created two equally spaced columns and two equally spaced rows. Cool. Okay, and again, right now it's lining them up perfectly. But let's say I want to switch up where they are. So let's say I want to put the red over here. Okay, I want to put the red where the yellow is. Okay. So let's go over the red. And then I got to specify grid column. Grid column. And then what you do is you put the name of where you want it to start, which is technically the center. That center line, because again, those are the different... I want to go from this center line to center to right. Okay, that's what I want. Center to right. So I'm going to do center / right. And then I want the grid rows to be middle to the bottom. Okay, starts at the middle, ends at the bottom. This should describe that bottom right corner. So see, now the red is specifically in that bottom right corner, because I said I want it to be starting in the middle, the center to the right, from the middle to the bottom. Okay, and I can do that with all the other ones. Just change them however. So let's try that. Oops. Z. Now let's copy this. Let's see here. Next, let's put this blue here. Okay, blue where the yellow is. So let's go to blue. And that's going to be from the left to the center, but still middle from the bottom. So there, now blue's here. Okay, see, it's moving around. Okay, and then let's say I want to move the yellow to where the green is. Okay, so that way you just keep seeing that this works. The yellow to where the green is. Or actually, that's orange. Okay, so I want that still left to the center, but I want it now from the top to the middle. Okay. And there you go. Cool. And I could actually define multiple rows. So let's say I want that green to take up that whole column. Okay, here's what I'll do. Okay, I'll go to the green. And we're going to say center to the right. Except I want it from top to bottom, so it takes up both rows. Okay, right now it's going to kind of get confused. Okay, because I'm saying the red should be there too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out the red for a second. And see, it kicks out the red out of there because it's saying, hey, the green gets to keep all of this. Now, if I were to take off the height, so if I were to take off the square styling on the green one, it should take up that whole thing. So I'm going to do that right now. Just take off the square part for a moment. And see now it takes up both rows because I don't have that height constraint. Because I specified that it should take up from the top to the bottom, from the center to the right. Okay, so that's how grid works. That's one way of doing it. Okay, there's another way I like that's, I think, even faster. Okay, so let's go back over here. Let me get rid of all these grid rows. Let me put square back over here. Okay. Put square back over here. Get rid of all this grid row, grid column stuff. Okay, I mean that method works fine, and it's pretty flexible. But I'm going to show you one better, the grid areas approach. Okay, so let's get rid of all this. So now it's going to be grid template areas. Now this is pretty awesome. What you do here is you just put in quotation marks a word that represents each area. So let's say I want the orange block first, then I want green. That's the first row. And then in the second row, I want, okay, and then what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to take off the square field altogether, because this already has a fixed length and height, so I don't really need this anymore. So they're all just going to be shaped however I decide to. So orange, green, and let's say first I want red to take up both squares in the bottom. So see, I created a 2 by 2 grid. There's 2 columns and 2 rows. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here, and then I choose grid area. I have to specify which area it belongs to. So this equals red on my template area. So this is going to take up these 2 red spots. Let me just label each of these. Grid area. Green. Okay. Then over here, grid area. Orange. And then here, grid. And you can give these names whatever you want. And this one's going to be blue. Okay, so right now I don't have blue in my grid template. So if I look here, I don't see blue. Now again, blue kind of wants to be here because it's asking for space. So what I can do, I think it's just I need to remove the letters at the moment. Let me just see if I remove the letter from blue. Oh, I think I can remove the letters from all of them now. See that, change it. It's revisiting it. Okay, it still wants to find somewhere to put that blue one. Okay, but you see here, it created a grid. Then see yellow, green, red. Let's examine this real quick. Template area. So see, I gave it a grid area. Maybe I think if I remove the grid area, then it might disappear. No. I would just actually have to remove that element altogether. Cool. So now let's say I wanted to make this top row have 3 columns. So I do orange, green, blue. But I want that last column to be all the blue. Watch what happens. See? So orange, green, blue, red, red, blue. Okay? It just follows whatever I put here. So once I assign each area a name, I can then reassign those areas easily just by reorganizing it here, which makes it really convenient for setting up your areas. And you can just kind of design things as you like, which is really super cool. Which brings us to our final topic, media queries. Media queries are a way to set up styles that only happen in certain situations. So the way it works is you would generally do it at the bottom of your non-query styles, and you're going to type in @media. Then you do parentheses, and then in the parentheses you do a rule, like minimum width, let's say. Or actually we'll say max width. That's generally the way you want to do it. Max width. Depends what you're trying to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a size that only happens if the screen is smaller. Nowadays the practice is to design your mobile view first. So first design for small screens, and then have the style change if the screen is gets a certain length. So that way you design for a small screen, and then the optional styling is for the large screen. This was referred to as mobile first design. In this case, I'm doing the opposite. I'm doing desktop first design, where everything else is kind of by default for a larger screen, and then I'm going to shrink the screen and the other styling will take place. So if I do max width here, and we'll say max width 500 pixels. Okay, and then you do a curly brackets. And then basically what you do is any styling you put in here only applies if this is true. So if the screen is less than 500 pixels, or 500 pixels or less, then these styles apply. So the only thing I'm going to change is the grid. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to do main. And I'm just going to change my grid template areas. Because basically it'll still inherit all the old styles. The old styles don't go away. I can just replace or override some of them in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change them all into one column. So I'll just say red, blue, green, orange. and that'll just line them up in one column once the screen is small enough. Okay, so when you have your dev tools opened up, okay, so these are your dev tools, and again, how can you get to them? You can, the easiest way is just to right click. You'll get this little menu and you can click inspect. Control-Shift-I is the shortcut on Linux. And I think on Windows as well. Okay, but what you can do is right here, there's this little item here where you can switch to mobile view. So if I click on this, see, it makes it a smaller screen, and see, the minute it got smaller, it changed to putting them all in a column, because that's what my media query said. Okay, so basically once this matched my media query, it did what I wanted it to do. And you see right now you can choose an automatic size for a bunch of different phone and tablets. If you choose responsive, you can drag it. So right now, see, it's 2080 width, but I can change it. So let me start shrinking the width. So right now it's still that other way, getting closer and closer to 500. And we're at 664, 600, 501. And see, the minute I cross the 500 threshold, it switches the styling to what I had in the media query. You can change anything. Okay, you can, whatever you can dream of, you can just basically completely switch up your styling. Now this grid template areas thing really makes it or grid in general really makes it easy to just switch up your alignment from, you know, big screen to little screen, because all you have to do is just redefine your grid. I like the grid template areas because I can just really, like, that was literally all I had to do was just to rearrange everything. I just gave every area a name, and then I just say, okay, it should look like this on this screen and it should look like that in this screen. You can also do minimum width. Okay, minimum width would just do the opposite. So this would just mean these styles would apply on screens 500 pixels or bigger. So now, if it saves, let's make sure it save. Should have saved. Okay, so see now when we're on a smaller screen, see it uses that styling we had before for a larger screen, but the minute I go over 500, it goes into that column style. Okay, so you can do it either way. And there's a whole bunch of other properties you can choose from. You can choose on whether the screen's landscape or whatnot. You can just look up the different ways you can use media queries. But that's the basic concept. So that way you can switch designs, you can switch fonts, font sizes, all sorts of things based on the screen size. So that way your website's constantly responsive to whatever screen the user's using. And using your dev tools, you can see what it would look like on different screens. Okay, you can sit there and see iPhone 5. My habit is I usually design for the iPhone 5 because that has the thinnest screen of all the options. Like, I'm pretty sure that's the case. Yep, the iPhone 5 generally has the narrowest screen. So if it looks good on an iPhone 5, it should be able to easily, and you do it right, it should be able to easily look good on all the other platforms. So you might want like 3 sort of points, one for like an iPad, and then, you know, once you get past like 1,000, then you can just go to normal view in a sense. But you know, you decide how you want to design it, but these are the tools you have to create great layouts that are responsive. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.